time here and then do a formal. Good morning, Suzanne. Good morning to you. Good afternoon to me. My name is Claudio. I'm calling you from Washington, D.C., from the studios in Fairfax City. We're very humble and grateful that Suzanne Ciani accepted our invitation to our show. She's one of the electronic music earliest and most influential figure. She's a five-time Grammy Award nominated composer. Susan, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Claudio, and good afternoon because we're 3 hours difference. So it's
Uh,
lovely to
let's
meet you.
go back to so nowadays with the pandemic and all this craziness in the world, and people die and not able to get vaccine. How is this interfering with your life, your personal life? Now you don't have the ability to tour, but how it's affecting
Well,
your life.
I'm living really in a timeless space. I haven't been home this long for
Yeah,
years because I was touring extensively. I was always on my way to the airport.
yeah.
And so, this has been in many ways a blessing because it's allowed me to turn to some projects that I never had time for before. So I'm actually enjoying being isolated and I'm in a beautiful spot. I'm right on the ocean. I try to keep it a secret because I know not everybody has a perfect place to be. And I guess I'm just lucky. My cats are very happy that I'm home.
How many cats do you have?
I have two cats.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, they
You got
just come. Yeah, I don't
okay.
find them, they find me. Yeah.
You have any kids or sorry, personal question.
No, I come from a large family. So I grew up with, there were six kids in my family, and I loved having that experience. And I'm a good auntie now. I have four sisters, and
Yeah.
my niece is here now, actually. So I actually wasn't able to have children. And so in many ways, my music is my
Baby.
child. Yeah,
That's okay. Yeah.
yeah.
I have one boy who's 17 years old, and he's into music too. So I probably one day he will take this business over and do whatever he want to do in his life.
I'm sure
I
he likes music that's different from what you like. Is that right? I mean,
yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I'm a very kind of liberal person, so I want for him to do what is great for him, not for me, right? So
Yeah.
I was a rebel, growing up in South America. So and I did okay. So if he like electronic music or this or soundtrack or jazz rock, whatever, that's fine. So you where were you born? Like in a musical family? I mean, when did you begin? I suppose learning piano or no kidding.
As I said, I had a big family, and my father was a doctor, but he actually always wanted to be a musician, and they wouldn't let him study music when he was young. So that was in my background. My mother was from the Midwest, and she did play violin, but she had six children, so, she never played it in front of us. She didn't have time. And but she bought a beautiful Steinway piano. So I grew up with this magnificent piano and I fell in love with it. And that began my passion for music.
And then you able to learn a little bit from your mom, or you took like classes or like a formal
Well,
kind of training, or you learn on your own pretty much.
so I needed to learn, and I found a teacher in high school
Yeah.
who knew about music, and he taught me harmony. And then, also while I was in high school, I started going into Boston, and there was a school called the Longy School of Music. And by this time, I was already playing, the Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto. I was self-taught. So I taught myself to read music and I taught myself to play, but of course I didn't have any training. So when I went in to audition at the Launchie School of Music and I played the Grieg, piano concerto, she looked at me and she said, "Can you play a scale?" And I said, "What is a scale?" And I didn't know anything. And so I had to start at the beginning. So I threw out everything that I thought I knew and, started at the beginning with scales and churny exercises and studying harmony with wonderful teachers there. And that's how I started.
Yeah, thank you. I'm quite sure that you're aware of the Berkeley School of Music. I don't know if that school existed at the time or not, but it's a
Well,
very
I wish,
well-known school.
yes, now I teach there, a couple of times a year, and I love it. But at the time, when I was in college, I was also in college near Boston at Wellesley, and I decided I wanted to learn everything about jazz. And I didn't know about Berklee College of Music. My life would have been different if I had, because I could have, taken classes there. But as it was, I would go to New York City and hang out in Times Square and try to find jazz, in New York City. So jazz kind of passed me by. But Berkeley is an amazing school.
Yeah, I have, as I say, I used to live in Boston, so I know the school well, and I have interviewed several folks that attended that, Berkeley and Juilliard School of Music in New York, and of course, the majority of the people that end up finishing and graduating, some do very well, some do not do very well, but it's an unbelievable education. It's a very good experience for them.
On
Uh,
the other hand, let me just say that I also protected myself because from the beginning I saw myself as a composer and it was very personal to me. My music was very close to me. And I was afraid of going to a conservatory
yeah,
because some of my friends who went to conservatories became very competitive about music, and very show-offy and this and that. And I didn't want that. So I avoided going into the so-called, the conservatories. And I did study music. I majored in music in college. I got a master's degree in composition at UC Berkeley, but I tried to avoid the factories.
yeah, gotcha. I understand.
Come
You,
here.
yeah. Do you think that you found music, or you think music found you early in your life?
Music came to me. Music came to me, and it said to me very early, it said, "This is your life." And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what the express. As we know, music is just a huge domain. There are so many unique expressions in music. There's no one path. And so I was just open. I was open to whatever the path was, and I followed kind of an unusual path because that's what presented itself to me.
It was difficult to sort of convince your parents, your dad, your mom. I want to. I don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to be an engineer. Music is my calling. I want to do. I want to go that path. It was difficult for you, or they
Well,
were very receptive for that.
it's a funny thing because I always say it's because I was a woman that I was allowed to pursue this. My father was a surgeon and he had five daughters, and he was Italian. So his father came over from Italy,
Yeah,
and his his ambition for his daughters was that we get married.
yeah,
And he was a very kind of domineering Italian father. And he didn't believe in women really having professions. And so it's kind of a shock that in the end of my five sisters, one is a professional artist, another was a lawyer in a big law firm. I pursued music. My other sister was an architect, and the youngest was an engineer.
wow,
So we all had professions,
yeah,
even though
yeah.
we weren't required, we weren't expected.
That's
That wasn't,
that's great. In my case,
yeah.
I grew up with seven women around me. So they, four sisters, my mom, and the two ladies that work at home helping my mom. So I was raised, I had a very good upbringing, if you will. So my conception of women and uh, in the world that we live is very, very different. I want people to do well and, uh, to respect women. Women in general get paid 80 cents or 70 cents for the same job, the same background, the same degree. We live in a very macho world, and it bothers me. In many ways, I'm happy now that the vice president, Kamala Harris, a woman, and you know, and so on and so forth. So I have great respect for women. And in your world, one of the questions that I will ask you later on, it was, your field it had been dominated for male, the 90% or so, right? So I'm glad that you won the Moog Award and you have done well yourself, and it's set up an example for a lot of people coming after you because it's very important. I do believe that um, people are the same. People have the same chances to study the same career, do well in life, whether female or male or gay or bi, whatever it is. It just is stupid reasons in the world that want to bring certain people in certain direction, like women are bad in math or whatever. That's an all nonsense. So I grew up. My mentality is very different. So I'm glad you have done well in your life in that sense. Do you remember when the first time you bought your album, the first album that you bought?
Well, the first albums that came into my life
Yeah,
were brought to me by my mother. She
yeah,
had gone to a fire sale and she came home with a huge stack of LPs, and they were all classical romantic albums: Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff, Chopin. Those were the. And then other than that, um, we all loved pop music, and we played 45s. So, I can remember The Great Pretender and, these little pop 45s, but my LPs were Indian music and classical music.
yeah. You still buy music from other people as well, or no? Or you
You
concentrate your?
know, I haven't bought music in years. People send me music and I absorb it that way. I kind of just open my door to what people send me. I love to discover things as people refer me to them, but no, I haven't been buying music. Sorry.
You remember your first encounter with sort of electronic music, if you will, in Boston or Massachusetts?
Oh, my first encounter. Well, my first encounter was very minuscule. My music class went to MIT.
Wow.
MIT was our brother school,
Yeah.
so we could share classes. And it was the first year of that relationship. It was like in 1967. Oh, no, no, it was, let's see, I was in college until 68. So, yeah, it was like 1967. And there was a professor there who was trying to make a sound using the computer. And that's the first I heard of this concept of music being produced by machines. And then I was lucky because normally, if you were a composer, you would go to Paris and study with Nadia Boulanger. Philip Glass went there, Steve Reich went there, everybody went there, and I was going to go. But my dad would have had to pay for it, and I was given a full paid fellowship to go to Berkeley on the
Yeah.
West Coast, UC Berkeley, which the graduate school was rated #1 in the country then.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I want to be independent. I'm going to go to Berkeley. And of course, that's where Don Buchla lived.
Yeah.
And I met him, and that's also where Stanford was. And they had, a pioneering center for computer music called the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory.
Yeah.
So I just say I was in the right place at the time.
That's great. A lot of it's a difficult question for me to ask, but a lot of electronic music pioneer in many ways have been men, and there's still a culture of man-dominated world that persists today. What's your opinion on that stuff? You are probably no one of the few, but fewer, if you will, breaking ground in this area.
Well, our history is his story and not her story. And what we're starting to uncover now, in fact, is that there were women in this field.
Yeah.
So we just don't know about them.
Yeah.
I didn't know about them. I wish I had had a role model, a woman, to look up to who show me this possibility. My role model was a photographer instead because that was a technological art form. But there were women like Daphne Oram, and I just found out about her a couple of years ago. She had started the radiophonic workshop in England, and then of course Delia Derbyshire. I didn't know her 5 years ago, and she was the one, maybe you know her, but anyway, she was known for doing they did tape, music concrete, and they worked with sounds. Electronic music, came through many epics, and one of them had to do with analog tape, because you could store sounds on the tape and then you could organize them by cutting and splicing the tape. When uh, when the transistor came in, it was much easier to actually make an instrument, and that's what Don Buchla did in 1963. I met him in 1967, and he had already evolved, his idea of a musical instrument. So I always like to say that the ideas, the concepts are separate from the physical realization of those because the technology depends on practical things like parts. Do you have integrated circuits? Do you have, uh, so the expression in technology changes as the technology evolves, but the concepts are what I'm interested in. And those are,
Was
yeah.
the the Moog was it was invented at the time? I mean, why you pick the Buchla versus Moog is the one that I think a lot of electronic guys end up using. I have no idea why. I didn't know that much. I knew that you were using the Buchla, but I didn't know how popular it was in the mid 70s. As well.
The Buchla was not popular,
Yeah,
and neither in the beginning was the Moog,
yeah,
because people did not understand. It was quite unnerving to look at this machine with all
yeah.
the holes and wires, and so Moog put a keyboard on the machine so that people would feel warm towards it and say, "Oh, it's a musical instrument." But that diverted the attention to the possibilities of this new musical language because it really wasn't meant to be a keyboard instrument. And Don Buchla refused to do that because he was saying, look, this is about voltage control, not finger control. Not you do an action and you get one result. So the Buchla was not as popular because it was not understood, but I worked for Buchla.
Oh,
You know,
wow.
ap- yeah, after graduate school, I went to work in his factory. It was small, and few of us sitting at tables and putting parts into circuit boards, but I fell in love with the potential of that instrument. And then, for years, now I'm friends with the Moog company, but for many years I was threatened by them because every time somebody saw a Moog, misunderstood what electronic music could be.
I see. I see.
So that was an evolutionary challenge.
Yeah, I got you. Okay, thank you very much. I will ask you now some question about some albums that I recently was able to listen to the Buchla concert 1975, I think it's called, and that's a beautiful album, man. How that album came together?
Well, in those days, what I was doing was live performance. So I worked for Buchla. I adopted his vision that this instrument was a performance instrument, and I dedicated myself to playing it live. I went to New York in 1974 specifically to give a concert in an art gallery. So I performed in Quadraphonic. And then the next year, I had a couple of other concerts, one at the WBAI radio station and another at Phil Niblock's loft. And we didn't record in those days
I see.
because it was quadraphonic and you couldn't really record. But there were some, the radio station made a stereo recording, and the Phil Niblock recording was, I think, just a mic in the room. Uh, and when, oh, well, my vault, I was never going to release them, but I was contacted by Finders Keepers in England, and Andy Botel asked if he could release some of my archival recordings. And I'm glad he did. At first, I thought it was a silly idea, like who would want to listen to this, but those recordings really are a document of performance techniques with the Buchla 200.
Yeah.
So, yeah, today I don't play the 200. I have the 200E, and the 200 I think really was the pinnacle of analog modular instrument.
In general terms, there's a big differences from between the 200 and the 200E, or big
Well,
technological differences, or
yes, many of the differences are you know very technical and tiny and maybe too much of a discussion to describe. I'm using a very compact system because I travel a lot with it. And if you notice in the day, my system was huge. It was 40, 50 panel units in two big cases, but I wasn't traveling by airplane every place. So I have a compact system now, and the 200E is distinct from the 200 in that it has a digital component. So it has, this means that digital is not really, digital is when we have menus and it's not real time. Digital has memory, but it's not interactive necessarily. So it's a compromise for performance. So I have a sequencer. In the old days, it was very, very big, and it had 64 knobs, and I could turn those knobs and interact with it. Now, for compactness, I have a sequencer that is one panel unit, but I have no access to controls because it's digital. So it keeps the space tiny, but it limits my interaction. So I've developed new techniques for the limitations of this 200E.
I got you. Thank you, Raj. What can you tell me about Seven Waves? That's a beautiful album too. I mean,
Oh, I'm so glad you like that one.
I love this stuff.
Well, that was the album I always wanted to make. So when I was a young synth, Buchla player in New York, in those days you had to have a record deal or you couldn't release music because there were no CDs, you couldn't make them yourself, and I could not get a record deal. So I decided to self-produce my first album, and so I made money. In those days it was very expensive to record. So I earned money doing commercials, and then I would book studios on the weekend, and I started this album. By the time I got into a position to make this album, I was no longer playing just solo Buchla. And also I had suffered in that medium because nobody understood it. And so when it came to actually recording, I made a synthesis of my electronic vocabulary and my classical background. So Seven Waves, there are 7 pieces, and they are based around melodies.
Yeah.
It's all electronic. The waves were made on the Buchla, of course, and each wave was distinct and designed for each piece, and then all the pieces were connected by the waves. And it took 2 years to make, and I'm very proud of that album.
Yeah, that's a beautiful album, right? The other one that I bought this weekend as well, according to Claudio, it's the best album you've done, is the live Quadraphonic. I really like that one. I mean,
Oh,
I don't have all your stuff. I don't know. I bought six this weekend, like I told you, from Bandcamp and Amazon. I have three or four, or the earlier stuff you have done with in private music, the Peter Bauman's label. But they
yes.
like Quadraphonic. At least it resonates with me a lot. And I think, in my opinion, right, it's the best piece of work you ever done. I don't know.
That's so funny because, I that was my very first comeback concert. So I hadn't played the Buchla live in 40 years.
Oh,
And how did I even come back to this? I mean, I reconnected with Don Buchla when I came back from New York. I came back to the West Coast, and he talked me into getting a new instrument.
gotcha.
And then I warmed up to it slowly, and it's funny, it's actually Moog
Yeah,
that invited me to perform in San Francisco. And so it was easy for me because it was close by. I lived near San Francisco, and it was a wonderful concert, but it was all new. It was a whole new machine. So it doesn't sound anything like the
well,
1975 concerts, don't you agree?
yeah, it's very, very, very good album. In 2017, you were the first woman to be awarded the Moog Innovation Award. How was the experience, man? I'm quite sure it wasn't shocking to you. It's unbelievable that after all the man, somebody say no, no, this
Well,
is
my whole relationship with Moog is one that I would never have imagined.
yeah,
Because, as I say, when I was young, Moog was the enemy because they were promoting, keyboard use of the machine, and that popularized. It became the buzzword for what this was all about. And I was always upset about that because it distracted from what these machines could do. So then, years later, I was invited to Moog Fest, and I said, well, I played at the first Moog Fest, and I did it so that I could play a Buchla. I said, well, I'm going to play a Buchla instrument. I played the MIDI piano bar, which Buchla designed, but Moog manufactured and distributed. So here you see the arc of time shifting things. They used to be East Coast, West Coast, and diametrically opposed, and now they were working together. And that's what continued to happen. So I played the piano bar in New York that year, and then I was invited to Moog Fest later. Again, I said, well, I'm going to play the Buchla. And they said, fine. And they always were open to my artistic preference, for the Buchla. And to me, they are an enlightened company because it's not just about my playing the Moog. But anyway, they were the ones that invited me to do that concert because they were trying to promote the upcoming Moog Fest. And so I did play.
sure. Do a lot of people in the world? I mean, I don't know if a lot, but it are there many Buchla, musicians using that Buchla instrument, or there's not that popular nowadays
You
in
know,
this?
Don Buchla never wanted to be popular. He always felt that if he had become popular, it would be, because his instrument wasn't uh, up to snuff. He was the esoteric nonconformist in his design. His instruments, people say, are expensive. So they are expensive, but now there's a revolution because the kids are playing Eurorack. So they've gone back to analog. And at this point, what my mission is that we reinvestigate Don Buchla's designs because I call him the Leonardo da Vinci of electronic musical instrument design.
Yeah,
And so even if you don't buy a Buchla